We're live.
Boom.
Boom.
All right,
And
Jonathan. So today we have the topic question is, do problems really exist? Is there such a thing as a problem?
good question. And I would say no, there is no such thing as a problem.
Okay.
They don't
Well, okay.
exist, but what's but yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this kind of topic. This is one you picked out. Can you
Yeah.
kind of elaborate on problems and do they exist? Tell me.
Yeah. So one of the ways I think about this, which is one of the ways to like simplify your life and to stop worrying. And the idea is that when someone says they have a problem, that's kind of weird when you think about it, because if someone has a problem, a situation that they would like to change, then they are either able to do something about it and then it's not a problem anymore, or they're not able to do something about it and then it wasn't a problem to begin with. It was just a fact of life. It's a circumstance. You can't do anything about it. So anything that people comes to me and says is a problem, I usually say, well, either it's not a problem but a task, like you have to put into your calendar when you're doing something about this, or it's something you can't do anything about, and you just should teach yourself not to worry about it because you can't do anything about it. And worrying about something that you can't do anything about or isn't going to do anything about just makes you unhappy. So the idea is sort of, there are three things you can do in life, but only two of them are actually constructive. So the three things are: the first thing is you can change a situation, or you can leave a situation, and the second thing is you can accept the situation as it is. And those are the two positive and constructive ways of living. Then there's the third option, which is don't change anything, don't accept anything, and just continuously feel resistance towards what's happening. And this is a very common pattern that some people actually can do for an entire lifetime sometimes.
Resisting their situation or life circumstances or everything,
Yeah.
relationships. I'm really really intrigued about this. So I want to ask you, Tobin, how have you been applying this in your life right now? Like off camera, you've been talking a bit about what you're currently going through at the moment, and that you've been able to actually worry less about this. And I think this actually applies really to what we're talking about right now, because for most people, what you're currently dealing with, I would say, would be a huge problem in most people's life, and there would be a lot of resistance, a lot of kind of like unhappiness, or a lot of kind of fighting what you kind of going on, what's going on for you. And actually, off camera, you're talking about this with you actually are not worrying about it so much, and you're more like kind of accepting it, and you're actually really like you're actually pretty happy. And there's
Yeah.
so what
I'm I'm the happiest I've ever been right now, which is how a conscious person's life should progress. As you become more conscious, you get the happiest time of your life, and that every day. Well, not every day because it can fluctuate, but you should
uh,
generally be feeling that things are getting better, right?
yeah,
But yeah, for my illness, what my illness means is that there's a lot of difficult physical symptoms, and then there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. Um, what's going to happen with my body? What's it going to feel like when my illness gets worse, which I know it will? What will happen when the the doctors will have to perform surgery? There's basically a lot of unknowns, and so the way I applied it was when I when I got sick 10 years ago. I fell down into a hole because it was impossible for me to deal with the fact that uh, I was feeling my body was feeling terrible, and my future had just completely changed, and there was all this uncertainty or whatever.
Mm.
And so I started applying this principle because I had known about this principle before, but I just hadn't been challenged to such a high degree in it before. But I started applying this principle that um, actually I applied it in a sort of meta way. So what I did was my motto or my slogan about my illness became the best thing in life is being healthy. The next best thing in life is forgetting that you're ill. Right? That was my approach to it. So I was just like, well, and this occurred over 10 years. I have to slowly practice this. It didn't happen overnight, but
Mm.
it was something I practiced and got better at. But I would just teach myself to, like, when I was worrying about the future, let go of it. When I was resisting that my body was tired, I was in pain, whatever, I would just stop resisting it, or I would do something about it if I could. But the thing about illness is most of the time I couldn't do anything. So I just taught myself to, like, okay, release the resistance, release this like inner tension that is like, oh, I don't want this, I can't have this, like this. The original symptom was, for example, I could be very tired and I wouldn't be able to get much out of my day. But that's just a fact, right? But then when I started thinking, like, oh, I'm missing out my days, and will tomorrow be the same? How am I ever gonna figure out my life if I feel like this? All that shit.
That's the worry, right? That's the kind of
That's the word, and that was the
resisting.
problem.
Yeah.
I found with time that as we talk about being conscious and all this, is that what makes life hard is thinking about it. It's not what happens.
The actual real experience of the moment
Yeah,
most of the time.
right. Because the moment is just the moment, and if there's no one saying, "Oh, this is wrong," well,
This is
then
bad. This is shit.
yeah,
Yeah.
then it's a pure experience. And yes, being in pain can be painful, but it doesn't mean you're suffering. Suffering is something different. Suffering is when you're saying, "Oh, I'm so, poor me, woe is me, it's always going to be like this, I blah 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 blah." That's what creates suffering.
Hmm.
The thinking creates suffering, but the pain is just painful. And even pain can be there can even be something good in pain if you're able to be in it in a pure way, because pain is just an experience, really. And there are things, and it's an interesting thing, because if you look at, like, I'm not really in the BDSM community or anything, but the people who spank each other and that sexual thing is like, a lot of what they do to each other actually hurts. It's painful, but they experience it as pleasure. And the reason they do that is because pleasure and pain very close to each other, right? And we have something like when we eat spicy food, like when we eat chili. Well, chili is actually painful to eat. It's just
And
straight up painful.
and then pleasurable. Sometimes.
But indeed, but sometimes pain can be perceived as pleasure, and one of the big things about this is that we either don't judge it, or we perceive it as something good. It's kind of like, when I'm drinking this, which is like carbonated drink, like this is like angry water. It's fighting back when I'm drinking it because it's like carbonated. But that's something's happening that's interesting, and that so it's perceived as pleasurable, but you could just as well say, well, it's this is not pleasurable, and some people would perceive it as painful, right?
Yeah. Okay, so you've learned how to kind of worry less, or like kind of go into the pain when you are having the experience, and just not you. Well, can you say your slogan again? Like the best thing about
Best thing in the world is to be healthy.
healthy.
The next best thing in the world is to forget that you're ill.
So when you say that, like, and when you are actually ill, you're in pain.
Mm.
How do you personally forget that you're ill?
Well, I don't think about it like today, for example, when we started talking together, I was kind of tired and a little bit low.
Yeah,
But I don't think like, oh, I am that way because I'm ill. I'm just in that experience.
yeah,
I don't think about it, and I'm not judging it.
yeah.
And
So
so there's no problem because there's no self-reflection. There's no looking.
conceptualization.
Yeah, very, very well said. Exactly, Jonathan.
Yeah,
I'm not conceptualizing reality. Reality just is, and because it just is, right?
yeah, and that takes a lot of practice to be able to allow ourselves to have thoughts and have the worry and just kind of see it without it being caught up into it or getting hooked into it or going like running with that thought or that victim or that kind of all the stories we have about whatever it is that you're going through in your life, illness, relationship
Right.
breakups, like whatever it is, it's like kind of because the mind loves that. The mind loves to have a thought, a worry of some sort, and then just run with that. And then you go off, and then there's 100 other thoughts about that. And next thing you know, you're years in the future about some kind of chaotic situation. And then you like kind of notice, okay, actually, where am I right now? Like, am I
Right.
right here just talking with you or feeling this pain in my body or feeling whatever I'm feeling in my body, pleasure, pain, whatever it is, like just being with what is right now and able to see that, to see because the thought feels so real, right? Most thoughts do when we get kind of caught up into it, especially if you have a big imagination like me. Like the thought can kind of just take us
Mm.
off in this place in the future or the past that feels so real. And then we get that in our body and then I don't know, it's just like, yeah. And what you're kind of saying is just like, well, what it seems like anyway is just being able to see it for what it is and let the thoughts just be there without kind of running with them or getting caught up in them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you were talking about that, I got this image in my head where the soul is leaving the body, because when you're worrying, it's almost like your soul is floating away, and then suddenly you're like you realize what's going on. You're like, whoa, I feel like shit. I feel grog. Like, what the hell happened to me? Well, because you were
Feel
for 10
heavy.
minutes. Yeah, yeah, for 10 minutes you were like you weren't in your body. Your life was just leaving you. It's just like, because you were just like you were in the future and the past or whatever.
uh, and
And
then and when your soul comes back or when you are with what is, what's that feeling like? Or what's
well, at first it feels like shit because you left it, but then slowly it reinvigorates and life comes back and you feel good, right?
yeah, and you get there's energy there. There's like a vibration or there's some kind of aliveness or feeling kind of present as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's interesting this thing of like how much we actually live in the past and the future and how much we live in like here and now and what's going on like right now. Like for example, you and me here talking,
yeah,
or if you're listening in, just listening to our words, or if you're watching us on YouTube or whatever it is, watching our facial expressions or hands or whatever it is, and not being like just in other thoughts from the day or the past or the future, just being right here now. I wonder if you're able to kind of measure that, if maybe that wouldn't be like that's a pretty logical thing to say, right? But if you're able to kind of in a day kind of look at like if you could somehow work out how much past, future, and present you are
yeah,
actually living, it'd be interesting to kind of see that. And sometimes you can actually when you're able to become more conscious and more aware to catch
yeah,
yourself when you are getting worried and in a future thought or past thought or and I think that's one of the cool things about this conscious path is the more aware you become, the more able you're able to see thoughts and see reactions and see behaviors that you're doing. They kind of can create problems or make problems seem quite a big thing or quite like a what's the word? I got this image of something blowing up, but like you know what I mean. Like, yeah. So just being able to see it as opposed to getting caught up into it or getting kind of pulled into that and feeling and then feeling that in our body and the whole rest of the things that happens after that. Power of being power of now. Yeah. Is that Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah,
You guys right
yeah.
into that.
One of the OGs,
Yeah.
the new Gs, really. He's kind of new.
The awakened souls leading the pack. But he's got a lot of truth to tell in that, I guess. And I mean, anyone you read who's like kind of teaching this stuff or um, hearing us speak, for example, like that can get you so far. But actually, what I've experienced, at least in my life, is like then taking that and applying it in your own life, or seeing how it works in your own life, or doing the work on yourself. That's where the true kind of realizations or the true power or true kind of um, the truth for yourself and kind of really comes alive, I would say. How do you see that, Tobin? What's your kind of
Well, you were just now telling me about your recent experience with staying conscious when you were feeling like emotional pressure to react and stuff. And and I was thinking, as you were saying that, I was thinking sometimes you tell me like, oh, Tobin, you speak so clearly, you have so you've got such a good grasp on it. And I was thinking while you were saying that is that the reason I have a good grasp on it is just like what you were saying at that moment. Is that you've really experimented with it. You've had a period where you really experimented with it. You were looking at it. How do I work? How am I applying this understanding? What happens when I do it? What works? What doesn't work? What is what is the conscious experience in this moment? What is it like to feel emotionally triggered? What happens when I do it? What happens when I fail? What happens when I manage to stay in my zen? The clarity comes because you have direct experience and direct observation, right? And so to have this, like, I think for both you and me, and for a lot of people, we have a natural curiosity about how things work, and especially people, and especially ourselves. And this curiosity of how things work, when we start to turn that inwards, well, we get blessed with the knowledge of how we work. And more so, we get blessed with the knowledge of how we don't work. And when we start to see how we don't work, that's all your problems just in front of you starting to be understood, and you're starting to be able to avoid those problems a lot of the time.
can I say one thing? What do you mean by avoid the problem?
Well, for example, if someone says something to me and I have an emotional reaction, like if someone says, for example, one of the things that triggers me is when I feel people talk down to me or they're condescending to me.
Yeah.
I was visiting my family recently, and someone did that to me, and I know this person did it unintentionally because it didn't have anything to do with me, but it triggered me so fucking hard that I just had to hold on for dear life to not like react. And I even did react a little bit, but because I was as conscious as I was, it wasn't like a super destructive reaction or anything. So it was fine. It was what it was. But I could have prior in the past, I could have spent an hour being annoyed at that, or I could have reacted back and like started a fight over something the other person didn't even intend, right? And so I avoided a whole huge problem just by saying, "Oh, something in me is malfunctioning right now," and I don't have to go along with that, because if I can stand the emotional pressure of what's going on and just take a moment, I can be like, is this serving me? Is feeling like a little is feeling like a tiny person that has to fight back uh to get my pride back or whatever. Is that serving me? Is that making me the fullest person I can be? Is that my highest self? Is that necessary? You don't necessarily have all these that thought process, but you're looking at it and you're like, is this something I want to cultivate, or is this actually just making me weaker, smaller, worse version of myself? I was like, well, this is definitely not something I want to react to, because it's coming from a place of me feeling weak, and then I want to fight back because now I want to be strong again. But you don't become strong by reacting from a place of feeling weak, right?
Yeah.
That's not strength. That's something a panicked animal would do, right?
Yeah. It's an animalistic reaction. Can I say, because it sounds a lot more like kind of acceptance of yourself or your emotions more than avoiding. And I can see that you're avoiding in what you're talking about, with that by you being able to accept yourself and not necessarily react to that situation or that person with what they're saying, or even react in a small way, not the big way. Then you said you avoid the fight, or avoid an hour of being annoyed or things like that.
Mm.
Could you say that that's another way of saying that, is like that you maybe just stop that being like what happens next? That like the consequence is that you don't get into the fight, or you don't get annoyed for an hour, or get kind of, or a
Yeah.
week, or think about that for months afterwards. Maybe you do think about it. I don't know, but like just the thing that you're able to accept and just act in the way that you know maybe you're a little bit reactive, but maybe you're not explosive. You could say,
Yeah.
and so you're able to accept, come into yourself, and then act from that place, and therefore not have the rest of the consequences that happen that could have happened afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so spirituality has levels, and that's why it's confusing, because on one level, avoiding an emotion is definitely a bad thing to do, right?
yeah,
Because it sounds like repressing. But when you get to a higher level, then it does feel like you're avoiding it, but you're not repressing it. But I totally understand what you're saying. So I would change my wording and say, if you can give space to what arises,
yeah,
without reacting to it or without trying to get rid of it. So, for
yeah,
example, in this moment, I felt very annoyed, very triggered, and I felt like I was a little child being spoken down to. My ego was like, I'm not a little child. I'm a grown person. I have to fucking. And then
fight back and battle.
because of
Yeah,
my temperament, that means I'll fight. But someone else who has a different temperament will just accept it, and then they'll feel like shit afterwards, right?
yeah.
But that's okay, because both are actually shitty options. So
Well, I would say that it's not accepting; it would be tolerating. Because if you accept, you kind of like
right, and that's
willing
why
to. Yeah,
I say allow instead of accept, because accept is a dangerous word sometimes, right? Because we sometimes acceptance is like resignation, right?
yeah.
So
But
for me, I always say, can you
yeah,
allow your emotions? I never say, can you accept? But then people are like, oh yeah, I'll accept it, and that's not what I mean, because that's resignation, right?
yeah. Can you
It's
be
the same
willing
with
to have the emotions? That's
Yeah, and
another
it's
way.
the same with surrender.
Allow.
It's also a very interesting word, because that can also have negative connotations. But to address what you're saying, um, by giving space to my reaction and not needing to get rid of it and not needing to act on it,
Yeah,
then I can get a moment to like come back into my senses. Because
mm,
I'm in my head reacting.
yeah,
I come back into my senses and I'm like, okay, this is the emotion, this is the thought. This doesn't feel like something I should be engaging with, because it's destructive, right? It's
mm.
like bad company or whatever, like this is not good company for you. You should stay away from it. And so giving this space, I'm like, I'm gonna choose to not go along with this. And then that might be uncomfortable for a few minutes or whatever. You're gonna have to sit with that emotion and allow it to be there. But then it goes away, and you were not compulsed by something that, if you had done it, you would have felt weaker, and you would have created problems, right? Because when you act from your lowest self, that also undermines your self-esteem, because you're like, oh well, I did that, and that's not what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So
And then there's becomes a whole lot of regret and kind of shame or kind of
yeah,
all that kind of stuff out of that those reactions most of the time. I mean, that's why a lot of people say don't, never react from your directly from your emotion, right? Because
right.
when we are emotionally charged, we're just very animalistic with somebody says something and then you react and then there's a back and forth. That's how a lot of fights, especially in relationships, get very out of control because it's just purely reacting and then reacting back, and we're basically both on the ego kind of level, and then it's just like how does anyone win in that in the state? Everyone gets hurt in some way.
Everyone loses. Yeah.
Everyone loses, and so it's quite a powerful thing when you're able to practice what you're saying now by just simply well, not simply, allowing yourself to feel the emotion, being willing to have that, giving it time to rise and then fall, because it eventually does. Every emotion has a rise, a peak, and then falls. And then when you able to then come from that place, it's a very different way of communicating or being with that person than reacting when it's at the top, at its
Mm.
like highest point of charged energy that you just yeah.
Yeah, and for people, you and me, we have like we're temperamental people, we're passionate people, and what's interesting is that these emotions, like sometimes the peak takes 1 or 2 seconds. That's it. And
Yeah,
then you're already cooling off. So if you could take that it's not for nothing that you have the old adage like count to 10, right?
mm,
Is that it really does. Well, it doesn't work alone, but it's a good. There's a reason for that tool.
yeah,
But I want to make a caveat here because we got a lot of people that are interested in stoicism and all this stuff, and there are people listening to this that are like, oh well, that's great because I'm already good at avoiding my emotions. Um, and so I want to talk about the fact that this doesn't mean that you're switching off. It doesn't mean that you're dissociating. And just to make it more complicated, there is such a thing as authentic emotions. It's possible to be angry, and it's the right thing to be. You can be sad; it's the right thing to be. You can attack, and it can be the right thing to be. Everything is every emotion is possible.
you're gonna.
But the thing,
Can I just pause right for a
yeah,
moment, because this is a pretty mindful thing to be saying on this, because effectively you're saying it's okay to have to not to have but to come from any emotion.
yeah.
And can I just kind of, for people listening in, can you kind of elaborate more on that, because I understand where you're coming from,
Yeah,
but it's important that you kind of go into it on a deeper level so people know
yeah.
what do you mean. Because yeah, so
So whenever
yeah,
we give like a straightforward rule, then the exceptions has to come because life is never, life. You cannot have rules. You must be alive, and then you have to look right.
yeah. And what you're
So
talking about is on a much higher level than
yeah,
than the every like, and that requires an ability to see and notice yourself on a deeper level to be able
right.
to distinguish and know which emotion is truth and which emotion is like an animal reaction, not animal, but like our primal
Yeah,
reaction. So
the animals actually do this much better than humans do. So we can't really blame the animals because we're much worse than animals when it comes to destructive emotions. So yeah,
we hold on, don't we?
we,
Animals
we
most of the
call it
time
very
just kind of
animalistic.
get it out there and then
Yeah, we call it animalistic and stuff like that. But the truth is, animals are rarely upset for no reason.
yeah.
So,
I would call it maybe a primal reaction then, because it's a
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it is ego, no matter how you look at it. So,
yeah,
and animals don't have that in the same way that we do. But the reason I know I'm complicating things, but the reason I say it is because there are people that learn growing up. They learn how to dissociate from their emotions. They learn how to detach from their emotions in a alienating way, and that is not what we're talking about. So that's why we have to say, well, it's, you shouldn't follow your destructive emotions. We have to say that, but we also have to say, but you should allow your emotions. You should feel your emotions, and there are times to express your emotion. And I talked about earlier
100%.
how this emotion is bad company. It's making me feel small. It's it's not cultivating anything positive in me. By looking and feeling, I can feel this is painful, and it's the kind of pain that you were talking about earlier. I don't know if that was on or off camera, but you were talking about like how some patterns, um, aren't really us, right? We get caught up in some emotions, some thoughts, but it's not really us. But there are actually emotions that are us, and that's when it gets very interesting. And that's and that's when it's okay to be angry, sad, the whole emotional spectrum. But the way you know the difference is by being mindful. You can feel that, oh, okay, this is not pain. This is a pure emotion. This is pure energy. I feel angry, but it's not a reactive kind of anger. The anger doesn't come from the fact that I'm resisting what's happening and my ego is annoyed with what's happening. It's like, it's not that the ego is lashing out and saying, I don't want the world to be like this. And so I'm going to destroy something. That's destructive anger. But there is such a thing as creative anger. You can be angry, and that can be a beautiful expression of your soul and of your creativity. And when you feel that for the first time, or it can be, a lot of people feel it when crying, right? Because there's also egoic crying. You can cry, and it doesn't, you have no catharsis, no release. You're just crying, feeling sorry for yourself. That
Hmm.
doesn't do anything. But most people have tried like pure, authentic crying. That feels really good. Like that
Hmm.
feels amazing, especially if you dare to surrender yourself to it, which can be hard if you're a man, for example, or sometimes a woman.
And
And anger is the same way.
completely like let go and be with somebody who's holding the space for that.
Yeah, or you
To
have to hold it if you have nobody, because you won't always, right?
yeah, to hold it yourself, to allow yourself to just let go completely.
Because one of the most beautiful things that I've ever experienced has been authentic anger in myself and authentic anger in other people. And sometimes one of the ways you can detect it is if someone is really expressing anger, and if it's really funny when they do it, and you're like, if someone's really ranting and you're almost like dying laughing. That's a good example, because they seem to be angry, and they are, but what they're actually sending out is energy, and energy is a beautiful thing. And if someone's really like just purely authentically really pissed about something, especially if it makes no sense, right? If someone is like, about to fucking throw the blender out the window because it isn't working and they're having a shit day or whatever, that can be really funny if they can be in it in an authentic way. Um, so my whole point here is just saying, like, if you learned growing up that you were good at distancing yourself from your emotions, that's not what we're talking about. Um, and that is a destructive thing. You're very much allowing, you're in the room with your emotion, and you're allowing it to be there, and you're allowing yourself to feel it. And you're just saying,
Totally.
well, you can be here until you're like regulated, until you're calm again. You're not pushing anything away, right?
No.
So that's why I just wanted to nuance that, because I know there are people out there like, oh, that's great, I'm just gonna become even more separate from my emotions. That's not the way. You actually
Or
become separate by allowing it to be there.
or I'm just going to be angry at everyone.
And that's
But
the
then
other.
the difference in the
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And that's whether you act out, or whether your destructiveness goes outwards or inwards, right? So whatever temperament you have, or maybe it changes.
Hmm. All this stuff somewhat requires self-awareness, really,
Right.
because to be able to notice and see which an emotion that's anger that's reactive, and an emotion that's anger that's creative and pure energy, that requires, I would say, quite a deep self awareness
Yeah.
that that requires cultivation, you know. And what have you done to cultivate that? Because you seem very clear on the.
Well, for me, what I did, like my early spiritual practice involved a lot of tantra, and people talk a lot about sex when they talk about tantra, but it's not my perspective that it's about sex at all. What tantra is about is that there are no taboos, that everything in life is included. You swallow everything up and you use it, right? So what I did was I spent a lot of time removing shame from my emotions. So I had to
Mm,
be like, well, society says it's wrong to be angry, but I don't believe that. I want to look at what is anger if I'm not looking at it in a negative way.
yeah.
And
If
as a
you're not
man,
looking at it as a bad thing, because a lot of
right,
people do, right? Anger, bad.
right,
Sadness, bad. Or whatever emotion that's considered bad in our society.
right.
Bad, it's not okay. Shame, you know, and then we stop ourselves from allowing to have that emotion. Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're talking about tantra and this. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience with that? Like, what's the
So, so the reason why tantra is confused with sex often is because when all the other traditions said that sex was wrong, they said no. Sex is part of life, right? So at a time like 1500 years ago or whenever it was, whenever you look at the history of the different traditions, the traditions had just decided that sex, we're not going to deal with sex because it's too much trouble, and we got monks, they go off the path or whatever. So it's taboo, it's wrong, don't mess with it. But Tantra said no, everything is part of life, and there's so much energy in sex that we can definitely use that to get to spirituality. It's very effective, actually. And so people were like, "Oh, they're using sex." Whatever. Well, they what they said was that every taboo has power in it we can use for spirituality. They didn't say that sex is the most important thing ever. So they that got kind of
mixed up?
distorted. And now when people talk about tantra, it's sexual massage, it's all this kind of stuff. But the way I see tantra is all inclusive. Tantra says yes to everything. Like they just say yes. It just says life. Yes, thank you. I'll take the whole thing. There's no like, oh, good, bad. This is no, you should do. No, it just says, I'll take it. I'll take the
Mm.
whole thing.
And that's been helpful with you with seeing shame or like kind of
Yeah.
not getting rid of shame, but like kind of yeah, just like yeah. So can you talk about that? What was
Well, for me, it just helped me to let go of like how I judge my own emotions, like being afraid, being ashamed, being angry, being sensitive. Um, as a man, crying, all these things. It helped me to understand that well, everything is legitimate. There is no such thing as a wrong emotion. And if society is small minded and wants to judge themselves, that's fine. And another one of my slogans is that if you fight with yourself, even if you win, you're also losing at the same time, right? If you make yourself a battlefield, doesn't matter whether you win or not because you're the loser because
yeah.
you made yourself a battlefield. So Tantra says, don't make yourself a battlefield. Just accept yourself as you are.
Mm.
And that's a big one. That's when you start out on the spiritual path. That's the only thing you're not going to do, right? Because you're like, I'm going to get enlightened, so I'll finally stop being this shitty person that I am, right?
Yeah.
So it's such an interesting thing how like the thing you try to avoid when you start the spiritual path is the thing that you actually have to do, which is like just take all your ugliness and become okay with it, and you'll find that actually most of it disappears just because you're no longer hating it, because a lot of your inner conflict comes from the fact that you don't like yourself. Like, yes, you may be angry sometimes. Yes, you may be sad sometimes. Maybe it's not the best emotions in the world, but now you're angry that you're angry. Now
Mm.
you're ashamed that you're sad. Now
Mm.
you're angry that you're afraid. Now you've really fucked up. Yeah, you like now you've
Vicious
raised
cycle.
them up in it's a vicious cycle, and it's like when you put that microphone next to the loudspeaker and just goes like it just goes worse, right? That's the
Amplifies, right? It gets bigger and bigger.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's the mental effect of that. So for me, I just just try to take out, and it took a long time. And there are still things that I'm learning to like let go of shame around that are like gender norms and like what men are supposed to do, women are supposed to do, whatever. But it helped me a lot because right when I started out, there was a big chunk of stuff to just like get rid of right away. Just by teaching myself, there's nothing wrong. Just let me feel this emotion and let me look at the emotion, not through an idea that, oh, this emotion is bad. Like, let me look at anger. I
Hmm.
have anger inside me. What does it feel like? What are the thoughts like? Just observing without any filter. What
Yeah.
is this thing?
I can't help notice when you talk about all this stuff, there's a lot of compassion. A lot of, I mean, some people call it compassion, other people call it self kindness, whatever you want to call it. But there is that genuine compassion for yourself, and from that place, it's when you cultivate that, then when you are with other people who are also very harsh on themselves or beat themselves up or put shame on everything or like don't allow themselves to feel what they're feeling, it can be a great gift to be able to um, give your compassion to them and also and allow themselves to feel compassion for themselves or feel kind of to say yes to the emotion or just kind of look at it, go into it, just be with it, and there's so much like in Buddhism. There's a lot of texts about compassion and the power of that, and it's interesting. It's like in a lot of texts and stuff, it's usually the last thing that people talk about.
Yeah.
It's like leading up to like, and then you get to compassion. It's like the beautiful golden kind of whatever. It's not golden, but like it's the beautiful thing at the end, which is really interesting. And I think there's a lot of learning and a lot of kind of importance with that aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. In
I
the
would love to talk about tantra more, but we're getting close to the.
Yeah, I want to go a little bit into Buddhism because what you said is so true that you have no idea. Because in Buddhist circles, this is such a joke. But what happens is that in the Dhammapada, I think it was, Buddha has a famous sentence where he says, "Love yourself and watch today, tomorrow, always." So he starts by saying, "Love yourself," and then he says, "and watch." And there's no Buddhist I've ever heard has ever talked about that part of the sentence. They talk about awareness. No one talks about the fact that he says, "Love yourself and watch." And let's look at why that sentence is so insanely important. What do you think is going to happen if you start to become aware, but you're not accepting what you're seeing?
Hmm.
What do you think if you start looking at yourself and all you see is this fucked up, angry, sinful, jealous, greedy human? You're going to hate what you see. You're going to hate yourself, and your awareness is going to just make you feel like you're the worst person ever. And that kind of meditation is going to make you feel like you're going into your own inner hell. And
Hmm.
I did that. I think I had a few years where I did that. And then luckily I stumbled upon someone who said exactly this, what I'm saying now. Because this is not something I made up. This is something I learned somewhere. But just understanding this fact that awareness, it must be preceded by acceptance, by allowance, by self-love, self-compassion, because otherwise you won't be able to look at yourself because you're programmed you're programmed with 200,000 years of primalistic, primitive, traumatic bullshit, and that's in you.
Hmm.
And if you start to hate that and have conflict against it, then your meditation is not going to be good for you. So you have to watch, but you have to love yourself. You have to be in complete acceptance of what you see. Only then will you have transformation, and only then will you feel that, oh, well, this is in me, but it isn't me.
I'm curious. Is that you making that shift and focusing on that, like loving yourself, part of the Buddhist text there? Um, has that shifted or changed the way you then see like your reality or see other people or kind of that inner internal shift with compassion or with loving yourself?
It's an interesting thing. It sounds like you have something to say about that. What do you think
Well,
about that?
that's what I've experienced, but I was just curious if that's what you had kind of because the way you're talking about it, it sounds like there was a big shift at that point.
I want to hear your thoughts on it because I'm not really sure what I have to say about that, actually. Nothing comes up.
Okay. Well, what I see is that like a lot of our reality that we experience, or even me looking at you right now, it's coming through some filter, through
Right.
maybe thoughts, maybe I don't know, some filter of like my filter, you could say.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was meditating right now and really kind of like very in the unborn, maybe there would be no filter. There would just be me seeing, right?
Right.
Maybe no me, maybe just seeing. But most of the
Right.
time we
Very good.
most of the time we have like our glasses and we kind of look through that and that's our reality. And
Right.
if the internal world or the internal reality that's going on inside us is looking through those glasses in a dark cloud, say, then when we see another person, then we're more likely to see the darkness in them or the dark cloud.
Yeah.
And as I see compassion, I see it as like the sunlight or the lightness. And the more compassion we cultivate within ourselves, the lighter the lens we see through. And so when we experience other people, we give we're able to see the light in them, and but that comes from within ourselves. And this text of like loving yourself, or like what is it? Love yourself,
And
and then
watch.
and watch, right? And like the thing with love yourself, you know, because if you love yourself, if you practice cultivate compassion within yourself, then whatever you watch or whatever you see comes from that place. Comes You see that's the reality that we then experience, and the lightness perhaps in other people, or the good shit in other people, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like we can focus on like any person we encounter, we meet, we can see the all the bad shit or the bad stuff with them, or bad stuff, the darkness, whatever you want to call it, and we can see the light and we can see the good stuff. I mean, it's whatever you want to focus on, right? And and uh, and this kind of like compassion, this is like such a it, how deep you go into it is your choice, I guess you could say. The deeper you do go into it, like the lighter the reality that we can experience becomes, and that's what I've experienced, at least in yeah, through that practice. Yeah, that's what that's my
Yeah, when you say it like that, like I know exactly what you mean. Like and the more you like yourself, the more you'll like the world. I mean, that's just how it is, right?
yeah.
Um because when you feel conflict inside, you don't like yourself, you kind of need to look for things in other people that you don't like as well to just kind of
Confirm.
make them as at least as bad as you are, because otherwise you
Yeah.
feel like shit and everyone else is so amazing. So you're kind of like you can never really appreciate other people more than you can appreciate yourself, because it becomes kind of a game of making everyone as miserable as you are in some way, right?
Mm,
I
definitely.
saw I saw some there was this diagnosed narcissist who had this share some videos and stuff, and she was telling about how she couldn't stand happy people. It was intolerable for her when other people were happy, because she felt so miserable all the time. Um, and that is kind of how it is.
What do you mean? That's how it is.
Well, it's very hard to be happy for other people if you're unhappy. And obviously, the right thing in life is to be happy for other people when they're happy, when they get good things, right?
Yeah, that's the compassion, and that's also the kind of coming back to like the problems, right? And do they really exist?
Yeah.
Kind of like this thing of like the bigger the problem that we create, and sometimes maybe we don't create them. Sometimes there's just I don't know, but like the bigger the problem within our reality, the darker the reality around us becomes. And so
Yeah.
when we're able to do the work on ourselves and see the problem and see if it, how it serves us or how it doesn't, and not react to that, and just be with what's going on and go into the feeling and basically do the work on yourself, the more we're able to see problems before they become something big and take over.
Yeah.
Interesting that we got to compassion. I didn't see that. Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, and I was meaning to ask you, like, because when we talk about compassion, compassion is a very vague kind of thing. Can you give an example on how, like, can you give an example to our listeners about how have you practiced self compassion? How can you practice that so that you get self compassion?
Just love everyone. Love yourself. No.
Right, but
Um,
but, but what's how technically do we do it, right? Because that's
yeah. You know, technically, if you talk about like an actual technique, then there's if you're into visualization and stuff, which I'm pretty visual person. Even if you're
yeah.
not, you can still kind of just sit there and well, I'll just say what's coming to me because this is what's simply what's coming. Um, but there's like a technique where you can imagine that you have like a crown on your head, or that you're kind of there's a crown basically. And if you kind of start to bring to mind like a time in your life where um, that you've been compassionate to yourself, or that somebody's been compassionate to you, and if you imagine that playing out and imagine what that feels like, and like kind of imagine it as like a an energy or like a lightness, and it kind of like coming into the crown of your head. So there's like crown, and then as this lightness kind of this energy comes in, then it kind of sinks into your heart. And if you imagine that compassionate light energy kind of just going in all directions through your body, through your now I want to like do the whole thing, but I'm just kind of
Like you're blessing yourself almost.
you're basically like bringing that like that time or that energy, that kind of time where you have been compassionate, and filling it up into your body, and then allowing yourself to kind of fill up with that energy, this lightness, this warmth, this love that you've given to yourself or given to others, and just place that into your heart. And from that place, just kind of allow that just to sink into that area. And can serve us deeply when we are being really harsh on ourselves, or being really
Mm.
mean to ourselves, or putting ourselves down, or being destructive and to ourselves or to other people. And when we can just connect into this compassion. I mean, another way of doing it actually is just kind of place your hand like this, and then think of a time in your life where you've used this hand in a kind, loving way. Maybe like to give somebody a hug, or hold a baby, or to give somebody a precious gift or something. And then if you imagine this hand filling up with this kind of warmth, this love that you've given to other people, And if you place this hand onto the part of your body where you feel pain, or you just place it onto your heart and just give that warmth, that love, that compassion to yourself, and just allow that to kind of be there, to go into your body, to go into the pain. That's a way of being compassionate, of being loving to yourself.
Mm.
That's what I would say. That's what I do personally, and I also help people do that in like a guide, more a deeply guided meditation kind of thing in the work that I do as a therapist as well. So,
And I
um,
think there's an interesting psychological effect in that, because one thing is that you're obviously doing these things. But another thing is, if you sit down and do something just for yourself like that,
mm,
that in itself tells you that you're worth spending time on, right?
yeah, even like sometimes when I ask people to like put one hand on their heart and one hand on their stomach and just sit with that, like in this compassionate, kind, loving kind of gesture, often people are like, "Wow, I haven't done that in many years or ever," kind of thing. And
Yeah.
just giving yourself that kind of space, that it's a very kind of, it can be a very, very heartfelt and very touching and reconnecting kind of to yourself gesture.
I do
Yeah.
that quite often, actually.
Yeah.
When I feel that, I don't know, I hold my heart, like the way I do it is like this, but because that's for me that feels better.
Yeah.
And I do that a lot while I'm watching TV or whatever. When I when I feel a need to be like filled up with something, or sometimes if I'm watching a very touching scene or something where I'm like, wow, this is a expression of the beauty of life, then I
Mm.
naturally want to touch my heart, because that's a connection to that place in my body somehow.
Yeah. Going like deeper into that
Yeah.
heart space. So there's an invitation there for anyone listening to practice, to cultivate compassion. You can do some of the things that we just talked about, or just simply just hold your heart and just give yourself that space, that kind of love to yourself. I mean, you deserve that. Everyone deserves that, right? And it's like, we can yearn for that from other people. Like, I want that love from you, and just look for it outside of ourselves. Or we can just go within ourselves and just kind of give that to to your yeah to you.
Yeah, and the sort of the big secret is that people can't really give it to you in the way that you need it, right?
Yeah.
They can give you something some of the time, and it can be wonderful, but it's not really what you need. What you need is yourself.
Mm.
And then when you have yourself, then you can appreciate and you can receive people in a much different way. But you don't actually need other people. It's just not how it is. And that's why
But
most
our
people find,
our minds think that that's the case a lot
right,
of, a lot of the time, until we realize that that's
our minds think that's the case, but who among us have ever found another person that fulfilled them completely?
well, that's a good, if you are that person, please leave a comment in the
Yeah, yeah.
in the comments.
It's because if you ask me, the only people I've ever heard who had someone who fulfilled it completely, they always say it after the person is gone. And at
Yeah,
that point, it's easy to say, because at that point,
it doesn't
you have a
hold in.
memory and imagination. You can make that whatever you want, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I've never seen someone who felt that way while they were with someone. Maybe there are some rare cases, but it's certainly not something we can count on.
yeah. But compassion you can do for yourself, and it is a completely powerful way of to cultivate uh, that cuts through so much stuff and problems.
Yeah.
You could say, yeah.
I heard a really wonderful idea, and this is not exactly what I do, but it reminds me of what I've done. That is, someone said, like, well, you should look at yourself as if you were someone that you wanted to take care of. Because people are so good at loving other people, but they don't do the same for themselves. So if
Mm.
you can imagine someone that you love, and you can start treating yourself that way, Because sometimes when we have someone we love and they're like bad, they're hard on themselves, whatever, we're like, don't be hard on yourself. Don't talk to yourself like that. Well, that's what I did with me. I didn't allow myself to cultivate thoughts of self hatred, self judgment, or whatever, unless I knew that it was good for me to feel bad about this because this is something I really needed to change, right?
Hmm.
I was very, very careful with that. It wasn't overdoing
Yeah.
it. But
Sensitive.
I think that's another thing. Is like just try to imagine, ask yourself this question. I think this question is a very, very, very violent, very powerful question. That is, am I treating myself like the way I treat someone or I would treat someone that I love?
Hmm.
That question is going to show you some truth,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not.
And then start treating yourself that way.
And then do that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as always, this has been a very enjoyable conversation, and it's gone off in different paths. And man, I really love just being here with you talking about this stuff. It definitely
Me too.
fills up my cup and spirit, and it's so enriching. It's so just like energetic, which is awesome. So we
I'm,
hope
I'm
also.
holding my I'm
Sorry,
holding my heart.
yeah,
Because you can, when you take something in, that's where it comes in, right?
yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, we hope you've enjoyed this as well and got something from it. And yeah, is there anything you want to kind of leave on a leave the conversation on? Anything you want to add to it?
Well, as always, we really enjoy when you drop a comment on our YouTube or on the YouTube channel where you can comment with us. We can comment back. Trying to get Jonathan to actually write his name when he comments something, so we know who's who. But
I'm
we're
working on
working
it.
on we're working on Jonathan's technical ability. It's always a challenge. uh, so if you feel inclined to do so, please do that. That's awesome. And otherwise, we'll see you out there.
See you on the trail, and
See you on the trail.